We keep counting off the days to Ohio State football on a Thursday night in Minneapolis against the Golden Gophers. Much anticipated to see the Buckeyes make a quest for another Big Ten championship and a college football playoff appearance. Of course, we got Kevin Noon on the line, of course, from Buckeye Grove on Rivals. There at the top of the screen, Tony Gerdeman, Buckeye Scoop, awaiting Steve Hellwagon most likely, who's got some family business to take care of. Good stuff to deal with there, but hopefully Steve can join us a little bit later. But we wanted to start near on time. Of course, bring your comments, your questions, your debate topics into the chat, and we will run them through. All right. Do we start with the mammoth speculation and everything that involves what everyone's going to be talking about and asking about, and that's expansion? Why don't we clean up the details first? We got a tight end decommit, as you let me know, Tony, before we jumped on, from a Benji Gosnell from North Carolina. Yes, from North Carolina.
Yeah, one of two tight ends in the class, so there was some expendability there. And I don't know the exact details of, Ohio State kind of maybe telling him like, well, we're a little bit full right now, or if that was the case. But the good news is they already have another tight end in the class in Bennett Christian. They are deeper than we thought they'd be at tight end now with, Ruckert obviously will be gone, but Cade Stover and Sam Hart and Joe Royer and G. Scott will all be back next year. So I don't know if Ryan Day was interested in having 6 tight ends on the roster next year. That's a lot. So I think this kind of makes sense for Ohio State and makes sense for Gosnell as well.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, out of Pilot Mountain, North Carolina, talented tight end. I mean, I had the opportunity to meet him several months ago at his school. Went on a little tour of the Atlantic East and met him. Really good kid. I think he might end up somewhere like North Carolina. If I had to guess, like University of North Carolina. I think he has a brother who plays there. But Tony's right. Ohio State certainly has a wealth of tight ends. Granted, the only one that is kind of a known commodity at his position right now in the collegiate game is Jeremy Ruckert, and he'll be gone after this year. I think it puts a little bit more emphasis on the G. Scott experiment to see how that goes. I know when we learned that Jalen Harris and Elijah Gardner both left the program for one reason or another, that it was mentioned, we still have G. Scott. Well, I think G needs to stay in the tight end room if that's what's going to work out for him. But you do have some guys with Stover and with Royer and Hart. So, and then of course bringing Bennett Christian in this class. So I think it was just one of those things that happens in recruiting. It's Ohio State's second decommitment of the class, with Dasan McCullough being the other. And life goes on. You just keep plugging. Ohio State still has the number 1 class in the nation, according to, I believe, all of the services.
Now we know with fall camp opening next Tuesday, August 3rd, we will most likely hit the air with our weekly edition on Wednesday, that you guys are going to get bombarded with update questions. We need an update from day 1 of fall camp. So I know you guys know is better than I do to gear up for that next week. So we are just about 6 days away. So any thoughts about how Ryan Day conducts his August/fall camp? Kevin, I'll start with you in regards to his approach and how that has contrasted with what you saw under Urban Meyer.
Well, this is year 3, I believe, and year 2 was COVID, and it was so far removed from any sense of normalcy. And year 1 seems like it was 35 years ago. So, it may not have as much of the same pomp and circumstance. I mean, I don't remember if there's the big presentation of Mick Marotti handing the keys of the team over to Ryan Day the way that he would to Urban Meyer. I know Tony's excited if the team goes and checks into the team hotel, and we can take plenty of pictures of that. That's his favorite day. But structurally, so much of it is dictated by what the NC2A allows. And he did kind of rattle off, there's going to be, 8 days of pads and 8 days of shells and blah, blah, blah. And, it rattled by so fast that I didn't necessarily absorb it at the moment. Shame on me. But, there are various ways to fillet a fish, just because I'm not going to support any abuse of cats. So I'll say fillet a fish here. And in doing so, I don't think that you can really have somebody who's just going to be some sort of trendsetter and do things that are going to be dramatically different than anybody else just because of restrictions that are put on in terms of what your camp has to look like.
Well, I also think two-a-days have been eliminated now, so that's another big difference. And they said they've got 25 practices. It's 9 in pads, 9 shells, and 7 in just helmets. And he was like, well, I don't know why some practices you can't have pads on your lower body and you can have helmets on. So he was like, it is what it is, though. It's the same rule for everybody, and which is what he always said last year about length of games or number of games or, masks and COVID protocols. He's like, as long as it's the same for everybody, it's, it's fine. Turns out it didn't end up being the same for everybody, but that's neither here nor there. This rule is the same for everybody, and so he'll have to deal with it. I am interested in seeing, the hotel check-in day. It's an annual tradition. There's nothing like standing outside of the hotel on a hot August day as, being paparazzi waiting for players to arrive and then being stared at by actual people checking into a hotel. Like, what famous person is here, and it's like, well, we're just waiting for the freshman bus. And then we're, waiting for some juniors and seniors. And no, we're just here to stock football players. Thank you. Continue on your way and go ahead and check into your hotel. And yes, there will be some famous people checking in later.
I'm sure that was high on the list as to why you got into the business, Tony. You were envisioning scenes like that.
Well, I would see it, and I want to be a part of that. Like some people could see, Michael Jordan hitting a winning shot and be like, I want to be a part of that. Me, I just saw a bunch of people standing outside taking pictures at a hotel and thought, gosh, that's me. And so, I'm like, I will go to college. And so I did, and here I am.
There you go. When people say so-and-so's living the dream, I think of all of us. Yes, we are the ones. We are the ones. All right. Kevin Noon's on the line from Buckeye Grove and Tony Gerdeman from Buckeyes Scoop talking Ohio State football each and every week with us with fall camp just 6 days away. That would be August 3rd. And of course, here we go. We might as well start in with the expansion talk, realignment talk, because we invite everybody to bring your comments, your questions, and the chat, mostly concerning Ohio State football, because that's what we talk here. But Kevin, I'll start with you. So we talked about this the other day in regards to, I know that there have always been outlandish rumors and ideas about what could possibly happen in these situations, but this seems to be potentially different, where some of the outlandish could actually take place.
Sure, anything could happen. If a couple months ago, if you would have sat there and said that Texas and OU had been in cahoots with the SEC for all this time and this was going to happen, it wouldn't have totally surprised me, but it certainly was a bit of a, I think I got to sneeze. When we learned about all of this, that it was a bit of a shock. A lot was going on. I mean, we're still in the midst of the NIL jungle of what's going on there and everything else, and lo and behold, this comes out. And now, if you're going to expand, if you're going to have realignment, you have to beat every bush out there, because you have the ACC with its locked-in grant of rights deal. You have, you certainly have a group of teams out of the Big 12 that don't necessarily turn on television sets, don't do a lot in terms of the athletic, reputation of what they could bring to the Big Ten in terms of widespread, from sport to sport to sport. So I think that it's very easy for us to sit there and say, oh, we're looking at what could happen with the Pac-12, whether it's a scheduling alliance, whether it's a merger, whether it's cannibalization, that the Big Ten acts as the larger fish and tries to swallow part of the smaller fish. I mean, I think anything is potentially there. And then we really haven't even necessarily gotten into the super conference talk, which, the more I think about it, may still be a little premature. But it's once ESPN and Fox and the television partners start swinging some weight in there and they start saying what it is that they want, nothing really is going to surprise me. I mean, it really is. I mean, if you would have told me before Rutgers and Maryland were going to be in the Big Ten, instead of somebody out of the ACC or Notre Dame or whoever, I would have laughed in your face. And lo and behold, here they are. But I mean, I can go all the way back to when I was an undergrad and Penn State was added to the conference, and that felt like and the geography was there, and that felt like a weird addition at that point. So I don't think that we ever sit there and whenever we see something and say, oh, that's a slam dunk, that's going to happen in realignment, generally just cross that one off the list, because the too obvious doesn't ever come to pass.
So while your overall theme here, Kevin, is that, don't be surprised by anything, everything's on the board. You did say that you would be surprised. Not surprised. You think the super conference is most likely premature. Why do you think that?
Just seems like a lot of moving parts at this point, and you're really having to tear up a lot of things at that point. And I think that anybody that wants to kind of put a super conference together may want to sit there and see where NIL and some of these other things land. Let these issues happen on somebody else's watch, and then kind of pick it up. And because the thing is if you go for a super conference, are you really that concerned about how long somebody's got a grant of rights for? You're just going to blow up the system at that point. So I don't know if you necessarily need to look for an off ramp to sit there and say, well, these dates match. So yeah, it's all well and good that you have an ailing Big 12, and then you have rights deals in the Big 10 and the Pac-12 that both seem to be coming up in about, within the same vicinity. But, if you're doing super conference, I mean, could you really put a super conference together just from those three conferences? I think you need to kind of look at the ACC and the SEC at that point to be able to get there. And the SEC isn't selling right now, and the ACC is locked down.
And through all of this, nobody is asking, what's the ACC going to do? They're just asking, what is the Big Ten going to do? And if they're not asking what the ACC is going to do, to me, that tells me that they think the ACC is going to be fine. So where's the concern? Why is there concern for the Big Ten? And I guess the concern for the Big Ten is that they need to keep up with the SEC because they need to be 1 and 2, whereas the ACC is okay being third because that's what they've been. So, to me, that's what that is. I think right now the safest, easiest thing would just be some sort of an agreement with the Pac-12, which they've done in the past. The Big Ten has in the past, and it fell through because of scheduling issues. But, that may be a way to give a lifeline to the Pac-12 as well through the TV partnerships, and it's going to give the networks inventory, which they desperately want, and it fits. And then if it fits really well, then maybe you're talking about a super conference of, I don't know, say 24 teams, Big Ten and Pac-12, where you've got a pod of 6 out west, a pod of 6 in the mountain to plains area, a pod of 6 in the Midwest, and a pod of 6 in the East. And then they fluctuate on who they play every year, something like that. I think if the Big Ten just stands pat, now you're competing with the ACC, which I think is okay. What you don't want to do, what I don't think they want to do, is go grab schools to grab schools, because that doesn't help you. It takes money away from the current schools, and it's just doing something to do something. And I can't believe I'm saying this. I would rather the Big Ten do nothing than do something. And after watching them last year, that's a tough call to make. Maybe no decision from the Big Ten right now is better than any decision from the Big Ten based on what we've seen.
Or at least any announced decision. So we basically have like 4 or 5 different groups in which this seems to be falling in regards to people's speculation. It's Big Ten does nothing. It's Big Ten adds 2 members of the Big 12, which tend to be Kansas and Iowa State, although there's an academic issue with Iowa State, correct? With the AAU?
Offhand, are they not? I mean, I've done this so many times. Have we agreed that they're not part of the AAU?
I'll
have to
my
scramble.
Bitsy
Somebody will scramble on that one, because I've been through this so many times too that and then you've got the Big Ten poaching from the Pac-12. USC, UCLA are the most seem to be the most listed candidates. Then you've got this Big Ten Pac-12 merge of sorts. And then you've got this either just Ohio State or Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, or Ohio State, Michigan going to the SEC. Those seems to be the containers of thought generally.
Yeah, and Iowa State is not part of the AAU, so it sounds like they should not even be considered because of how stringent the Big Ten has been in adding those members. So, yeah, I don't know what the best answer is, other than I think the best answer is the Pac-12, and whatever way you want to do that. If at first you just want to come to some agreement, and then after that, if you realize, you know what, I'd rather like if the Big Ten is like, if we just add a couple of more, or 2 or 4 teams, although I don't know how you do an 18-team league, if you do pods of 6 or something like that, because once you get so big, you can't just keep it in divisions. You've got to do something about it. If they do 2, that's 16. So yeah, that would be the easy thing. But there are some interesting programs out west. I mean, and programs that would fit, and programs that would make people stand up. Like you add a USC and Oregon and UCLA and a Colorado. Like, sure, those last 2 aren't much, but Colorado has a national title in the last 30 years. UCLA has been around for a long time. And of course, USC and Oregon are major programs. Are they down? USC is, but Oregon is on its way. It's a consistent program. There's plenty of stuff to like there. It's as, I guess, as notable as what the SEC has done. And so I think if that's what you're going for, then you've accomplished that.
Didn't what we experienced during the pandemic and how each conference approached it, didn't that give us a look into the power structure of each conference and what's important? So you had the SEC that was steamrolling straight ahead. We're playing football. Then the ACC tended to just align with the SEC. They seemed to be a little brother to the SEC of sorts. Then you had the Big 12. They latched on to that threesome there. And then you go out west, and the Pac-12 seemed to put football in the back burner. You could argue at one point in the pandemic that their situation was more severe. They had some hot spots, but everybody had hot spots at various times. But where there was this just conflict that showed, at least to me, that there's a gap of thought and priorities between academia and the working class, I guess you could say, would be in the Big Ten, where the football is so successful, but there's still a very high standard of academics attached to it. So now you play it into this situation, and it seems like football is always going to rule in the SEC. There could be some type of fight between athletics / football versus academics in the Big Ten.
Well, I think you come down to the philosophical debate of what is expansion? Where does expansion really matter the most? I mean, I think to us on this show, and to definitely all of your viewers, we look at it from an athletic side. We look at it from what the on-field result is, and that isn't even necessarily of what does this mean for field hockey or ice hockey or baseball or anything like that. This is football. But obviously the Big Ten has shown with its AAU demands that this is, expansion is so much more. And I know that we had our show on Monday, I believe. I don't know. The week is running weirdly for me. On Monday, that We're talking about admission to the BTAA, which was formerly the CIC. The BTAA, I think, is like Big Ten Academic Alliance. The CIC was the Council on Institutional Cooperation. Billions of dollars with a B, billions of dollars are at stake there. When we're talking about needing $70 million, of perceived added value to be break even for a television contract that a team needs to bring in, that's 70 million. We're talking billions. So, I'm sure that the Big Ten certainly has this view of, it wants its teams to fit within certain frameworks, certain parameters in terms of academic accreditations and things along those lines. If we really let the eggheads make this decision, they would just go for Cal and Stanford and call it a day, because that would get them all of their academic jollies at that point. I mean, they certainly, that 9.5 billion that the CIC or the BTAA would certainly swell with those two schools in there. But you talk about leadership of conferences and how things go on. We've already gone through Big Ten Media Days, so it's going to be about a year before they hear me speak again and I could get in trouble. But what kind of leadership does the Big Ten have right now? I'm not really quite sure at this point. I think that the move of putting Barry Alvarez into a football monitoring role is certainly a step in the right direction. Barry Alvarez certainly was an ally of playing football, is an ally of the things that we all hold dear. But where does Barry Alvarez's reach end, and where does the reach of the Dr. Schlissels at Michigan and some of these other presidents, where does that begin? Everybody's concerned about Kevin Warren in the top spot, but it's those damn eggheads that are going to get everybody in trouble, in my opinion.
Let me just correct one thing that I said. Iowa State is part of the AAU, but so what? You can't compete with Oklahoma and Texas with Kansas and Iowa State. It reminds me of the starting shooting guard after Michael Jordan retired the first time for Chicago was Pete Myers. Does anybody remember Pete Myers? Pete Myers is. So do I. He was fun. He was a defensive guy, but the general person isn't going to know who Pete Myers is. Pete Myers is Iowa State and Kansas compared to Michael Jordan of the Oklahoma and Texas, even though Iowa State certainly has their success against those programs.
And the thing before we introduce Steve here, that people get caught in the moment, and Iowa State's hot right now. Matt Campbell can't be, your realignment can't depend on one guy. and it pretty much would depend on one guy, Matt Campbell, coaching at Iowa State forever, because Iowa State is a 3-win football program. And until they prove it otherwise for an extended period of time, plus the other, the money draw on the facilities and everything else, the footprint and the recruiting doesn't come with Iowa State. It would be simply, we got a good football team suddenly, and maybe that gets maintained to some degree. So Iowa State is not the gem that a lot of current football fans think that would be. And one other thing, Steve, before we pitch it to you, is just, again, love to get Steve's thoughts on this as well. It just seems to be, I think the football heads in the room, as Kevin pointed out, we think that football is the cash cow for everything and supporting everything. And that's not necessarily the case. And in this case, it is a drop in the bucket. Steve Hellwagon, Bucknuts, of course, joining us as always. Good to see you, Steve.
Yep. And my other thing was they replaced Phil Jackson with what? Tim Floyd? Is that what the Bulls did?
Of Iowa State.
Is that right? And it's a perfect analogy, Iowa State. So Iowa State is never your answer. I'm just kidding. There'll be a clamor to go to 16 because we've got to have 16. Well, you got to have the right 16. That's the problem, is if it's not Notre Dame, it could be Notre Dame and anybody just to balance it out, and it's the right 16. So it could be Notre Dame and Iowa State if that's what you want to do. Somebody asked me on Twitter last night, what about Iowa State? And I said, they've already got every home in the state of Iowa tuned into Big Ten Network. This at a premium price. You don't gain any more money by adding Iowa State. I mean, you gain $0 by adding Iowa State. So, I'm of a mind that if it's a non-entity, it's just not worth it. It may seem like 16 is some magical number, but if TV isn't going to pay you more for your rights based on value, and SEC will get more value by having Texas and Oklahoma as part of their conference, and maybe 1/16 of that pie will be worth more than 1/14 of the current pie, which, again, the mathematics have to add up. I guess they say the current CBS value on that contract is completely undervalued. And when they resell that to ESPN or ABC or whoever, that's going to be a huge windfall for the conference alone. So you have to bring value. And, USC, UCLA, I don't know. To me, that seems like a lot of messing around. So and a lot of 10 o'clock games. So I just don't get where that really brings much to the table for Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State, which I think is also part of this discussion, and maybe Nebraska. I don't know. Wisconsin, maybe. I don't know. It's interesting where this is headed, but there was a lot of talk a few years ago that we would eventually get to these 16-team mega conferences, and SEC has beaten everybody to the punch with what's going to be the absolute best 16-team mega conference. No question about it.
As Cheryl points out here, I think this is a thought process of a lot of people, and I get it, but it's thinking in a silo. So big deal, the SEC. It's already the best conference. They add Texas and Oklahoma. If Texas and Oklahoma play the kind of football they have for the past decade, well, they add one of the top 5 teams in the country, roughly, in Oklahoma, and Texas will continue to underachieve and be the 10th best team in the SEC, I guess, would be the conversion pretty much. Okay, let's say that happens. Big deal. Okay, Ohio State, if you don't care about the entirety of the Big Ten, Ohio State just continues on its merry way, ruling the Big Ten and showing up for the playoff every year against whoever shows up for the SEC, which is probably going to now be 2 teams until we go to 12 teams. And then it's going to be 5 or 6 teams from the SEC, and maybe the Big Ten gets 2 in or whatever. So, but I think that there are just ramifications beyond that in regards to recruiting, number one, where just there's already a thought from, and this is one of the reasons why Texas A&M is caught and passed Texas in recruiting, and certainly on the field, that when you can say we're the SEC to a recruit versus the Big 12, and now the Big 10 may start to take on that kind of perception that this is the league that does nothing. They're not on that upward trajectory. Just the look of it, Oklahoma and Texas joined the SEC, and the SEC was already king. So just your typical 5 stars going to say, okay, well, I go to Ohio State. I'm just going to play a football season to wait for the playoff. I just think it's going to be difficult to overcome the negative recruiting that Ryan Day and his staff's going to face.
I don't know. I don't know if it hurts Ohio State as much as it helps or hurts the rest of the conference. I think Ohio State's still going to go out and get its kids from within the footprint. And with that footprint, I really mean just the state of Texas. Ohio State does recruit Oklahoma a little bit. Josh Proctor's from there. They're recruiting Chris McClellan from the same high school, Owasso. But I think it hurts other schools because other schools may not be able to show the record of success, the record of production, of development. So maybe your Penn State, your Nebraska, whoever, and I'm not trying to put Penn State and Nebraska necessarily on the same level. Every Penn State person I know would freak out and yell at me if they heard me say that. But I don't know if they're going to be able to go down there and recruit as well, because suddenly Auburn, suddenly even Missouri or somebody can look a little bit more attractive by saying, hey, we're SEC. You're going to be, you're going to play a couple of games at home, or you're going to, in your home state when we go and we play either A&M or we play Texas or whatnot. So there certainly is an issue there in terms of where it hurts in recruiting. And I do want to correct you somewhere. The Big Ten does do something. It cancels football. That's what the Big Ten does. And then it doesn't revisit it. And then it revisits it. So there's not inaction. It's just incorrect action.
It's good to be accurate. Definitely. That's exactly what happened. All right. Talking Buckeyes with all of you each and every week. bring your comments, your questions in the live chat. Of course, we got Steve Hellwagon on board from Bucknuts 247 Sports to join Kevin Noon, Rivals, Buckeye Grove, and Tony Gerdeman from Buckeye Scoop. And before we continue on, we got a nice little natural break here. I want to know what these guys are up to so you guys can follow them. Kevin, what do we have going on in your world, and where can we find you?
Sitting right here.
There you are.
No, I'm on Twitter at Kevin_Noon. I'm at BuckeyeGrove.com. You can find me there. We're just getting ready for the start of fall camp, really, at this point. There's a big recruiting weekend coming up with the Buckeye Barbecue Bash and Box Social. I don't know. That's a lot of B's there, but they're doing something on Thursday. We'll have coverage coming out of all of that, as they're going to have some top talent in from in-state and beyond. And we're really just getting ramped up for the start of the season. So, keep it locked in there. Be sure to follow me at Kevin_Noon on Twitter, and be sure to bookmark BuckeyeGrove.com.
Tony.
Yep, you can find me at BuckeyeScoop.com. My Twitter handle is at Tony Gerdeman. Podcast, Buckeye Weekly Podcast, Tuesdays and Fridays, getting ready to ramp up to 3 or 4 times a week now with the season here. And currently I am taking about a 3-hour break from my weekly Wednesday chat. So, that's about the most current up-to-date information for you.
Steve?
Well, Steve Hellwagon, at Steve Hellwagon on Twitter, bucknuts.com, part of the 24/7 Sports Network, working on some basketball stuff and some football stuff, and trying to get some odds and ends out of the way, moving both of my kids out of college today. So I'm actually at his apartment trying to get it cleaned up so we can get the deposit back. And that is always a struggle, as everybody knows. So working on that, and getting ready for the start of preseason camp late next week. The slumlords here on campus, they are not have no sympathy. You got to leave it better than you found it. So there you go.
We had a similar situation with my daughter just a few weeks ago. Fortunately, it was off campus, but fortunately that will be the last of that. She graduated. So that's that in regards to those kind of situations.
My last apartment off campus, when I moved in, there was still crap in the shelves and stuff. So when I moved out, did I clean it entirely? No. Was there beer cans still strewn hereabouts? Yes. But what I did is I left a letter with the key as I turned it in saying, my dad is a lawyer, and if I don't get my entire $370 deposit back, we will sue. And then I got my deposit back.
That worked. That works.
It worked. Yeah. And I didn't have to clean.
Nobody likes litigiousness.
Except lawyers.
Finally, it worked in somebody's favor. Yes.
Why is there so much conference solidarity in the SEC? And I'm not talking about officially. I'm talking about it's just on display for all to see. It just means more. I actually think the conference solidarity based on, I'm just taking in feedback from fan bases who say either I could care less about my rivals, could care less about what we do outside of conference. Well, you've gave kind of 3 buckets. You got your, I don't care what they do. You got I root against them all the time. Actually, they step out of conference, I still root against them. And then you got your conference pride that I root for everybody. I hated Michigan the weekend of Thanksgiving because I always do. But I was actually rooting for them in the bowl game 6 weeks later. But that just I don't think there's any question in the SEC. We hear the chants all over the place. I do think that the Big Ten, although it's a probable distant second, would be second in that camaraderie, that brotherhood amongst conference fan bases. Steve, you got any take on why that exists, why it doesn't in certain parts of the country?
Well, I think they have that whole South against the world thing that kind of unites them to begin with. They were the Confederacy, and, they had to band around one another, 150 years ago for the Civil War, and they've got that as kind of a common thread that, Alabama went to war with Mississippi and then Louisiana and Georgia, and they fought the rest of the nation, basically, those states. So I think that kind of binds them in perpetuity, that they've got that whole Old South thing, that kind of binds them together, and hatred for anything outside their region. And I think that may be the starting point for it. Secondly, they are the best conference in football and have been since Urban Meyer put his knee on Jim Tressel's throat there on or about January the 5th, 6th, 7th, whatever it was, of 2007. I think from that moment on, it's been an SEC world, and we're all just living in it. So they've got a lot that they can be collectively proud of, that they don't lose big games. Their best teams rarely go down to defeat in the big games. I mean, their record in top 10 games against other conferences, they're probably batting 750 if you think about it in all those games. So even in bowl games, their teams come through a lot of times. So I don't know. It just, again, they've got built-in recruiting advantages, obviously. Florida, Georgia, Tennessee, Louisiana, South Carolina, that's where the talent is. I mean, a good portion of it comes out of there every year. So they're mining those areas, and those schools are now going into Texas and getting players, coming up to the Midwest and getting players, and certainly going out to California and getting players if they want. So in my way of thinking, they've got a lot that they can brag about, and it kind of gives you more teams to root for. When your team may not be the top dog this year, you can get behind LSU or Auburn or whoever wins it. I'm not saying an Alabama fan's really excited to root for Auburn, but the rest of the SEC people are, and you hear that SEC chant a lot of times at some of these games. So whatever. It's their little thing that they like to have, but I like to think that it's a regional thing, that they were drawn together and are still joined at the hip all these many, decades later. It's kind of an us against the rest of the country mentality.
Yeah, I agree with Steve there that it certainly is kind of, I think of any region that the South has the most regional pride in terms of we're the South. I mean, I grew up on the West Coast, and it was like, oh, cool, surf's up. We're all from, we're from Cali. We didn't want to associate with Northern California or Oregon or Washington State or anything like that. It was much, much more there. I mean, you have a situation in the Midwest. Oh, are you from the upper Midwest? Are you, no, I don't. I think there's a lot of times where people are like, oh, he's a Midwesterner, that's cute or whatever. I don't want to say that it's derogatory. I've lived in the Midwest for a long time now. I certainly do enjoy the label, but I think Southerners, their country music songs and bumper stickers with half-naked ladies on Ford pickup trucks about Southern pride or whatever. So I think some of it's there. I think you also look at, there's just not a lot of pro competition down there. So they're all cheering kind of for the same teams. They're all Braves fans. I mean, they're all Braves fans. I mean, they're mostly Falcons fans, unless you get out to the further reaches for Saints fans. I mean, yeah, sure, you got the Panthers up in North Carolina, but I consider North Carolina an ACC state. And then, of course, A&M brought Texas into it. So, I just think that there's a lot more of a common thread that everybody carries down there. So while the rivals are real, and obviously Auburn, Alabama, my wife went to Ole Miss. She hates LSU with a passion. Everybody thought that her hatred would be toward Mississippi State, but it's to LSU, and with a lot of Ole Miss people, it is. But I think that once you get removed from that, I think that there's just a lot more of a tie that binds there in terms of where everybody's at, and that's why you see it.
I also think there's a sense of, obviously we're fans of sports because that makes us feel good. And in the SEC, you can only be a fan of a couple of the teams in the SEC, knowing that it's going to be a good year. So why limit yourself to that? And then your second team is the SEC. That's your fallback. It's just the entire SEC. That way it's rare that your season is going to end on a down note because you've got Alabama. I was almost going to say you've got Georgia, but they never have. So they have the Alabama, they have the LSU when they need it. There's usually a team there that you fall back on. And growing up, it's like you had an American League team and a National League team. The SEC, you have your team and then the conference champ or the conference as a whole. And I guess it's just because, you want to feel better about your life at that moment. And sports is one way to do that for all of us. We all have our own things. So I think maybe that's it, along with a lot of what Kevin and Steve said. But I guess, why not root for a winner if you always have to root for a loser? Why not, have your cake and eat it too, I guess, as they say.
Absolutely. Talking Buckeyes with these three each and every Wednesday, 2:00 Eastern time. So be here, bring some folks in. We are just, let's see, in 3 days, it's Saturday. Is that the 5-week mark? Well, obviously they're kicking off on a Thursday, so my counting's all screwed up to begin with. So it will be, we are 1 day from Thursday. So it must be 5 weeks from tomorrow would be the Minnesota game on the road.
36 days, 35 days.
And we also had Big Ten Media Days after we all got together last week, correct?
Yes. We had our thing on Monday or Tuesday to get it out of the way before the traveling. Yes.
So Steve, not that we have to cover this, start to finish or anything like that in regards to we've distanced ourselves, but anything stand out in regards to anything that you found meaningful out of any of the coaches and players?
Oh, there were a few things. I think it looked good that Scott Frost and Trev Alberts were palling it up. It looks like Trev is on the Scott Frost bandwagon, where most people think he's on a hot seat at Nebraska. He may have a couple more years to try and get that ship righted, which he may need. I thought that was probably good. Indiana and Tom Allen, kind of the things I say, they're my old boss, Mr. Bucknuts. Some people remember him. He had a saying that, you're the dog that's caught the car. Now, what are you going to do with it? It was great you chased the car down the street, but now what are you going to do now that you've caught the car? That's the next thing. And they beat Penn State. They beat Michigan last year. They beat Michigan State, 3 teams that have been thorns in their side, and they came up short against Ohio State. Is the next step to take to go and win the division this year, and perish that thought obviously on an Ohio State broadcast that we're talking about. But I think that was interesting. And Jim Harbaugh, I think opinions were mixed on him. I thought he seemed a little more lucid than maybe he normally does. He usually seems like he's way out in outer space, aloof somewhere, almost unhuman with some of his responses and some of the words he uses. But and there was a little bit of that. But I think he showed some humility. I mean, he's had his brains beat in for 6 years. The record is what the record is. And 2-4 last year, they're starting over with the program essentially in his 7th year now, basically back at ground zero. And either is he going to be the guy to resurrect it, or is he just going to be on the scrap heap along with Brady Hoke and Rich Rodriguez as guys who tried? And I think, we're going to get the answer to that question probably the next couple of years, because this can't go on forever with the malaise that they are in. And yet I think some people were impressed with what he had to say. Kevin Warren, the commissioner, he spoke for 45 minutes. He filibustered for about 30 of that and trumped up all the accomplishments of the conference. Didn't seem to have any kind of remorse about how last year went down. And obviously he was given a bag full of poop to eat in front of the world. I mean, Jim Delaney never dealt with anything quite like that. And yet most people think anybody would have handled it better than Kevin Warren did. So a lot of questions. He had no idea about realignment, conference realignment, no clue about that. Had no clue about the impact of name, image, and likeness. No ideas on the playoff expansion from 4 to 12. So, beyond that, he seems like he's on top of everything. So I know a couple of my colleagues really took him to task. I didn't necessarily go overboard with my criticism of him, but this is a difficult time. He needs to step it up. He needs to build a consensus figure out what's going to be the master plan for the Big Ten for the next 5, 10, 20 years, implement it, and go from there, because there is a lot that needs to be done. There's a lot of work that needs to be done with the Big Ten Conference and getting these 14 schools as it's constituted to come together and face the future of what it's going to look like in college athletics, and to be at the forefront. So those were some of my thoughts around the conference. I'll save, you guys can talk more about Ohio State if there was anything that stood out, just some mundane housekeeping type things I thought from Ryan Day. But that was some of the 3 or 4 of the storylines that stood out to me.
Well, I'll take you to task, Steve. You said that Kevin Warren didn't have any answers. His answers were, well, we're going to watch and we're going to see what happens. So for you to say he has no answers, sir, he has answers, and it's sit by and watch everything happen around him, and then maybe try to do something should the need arise. He was roundly criticized day 1, and I swear on day 2 he looked hurt by it, because he was still introducing each coach. And, he was upbeat on day 1, and he sure seemed downbeat on day 2 at the start of it, because I'm sure he thought he hit a home run on that day 1, answering all of those questions that people were asking. He was out there in front of everybody answering questions, except he wasn't answering any of the questions. It was basically just, great question. I'm totally aware of Oklahoma and Texas. It's going to be interesting to watch. Next question. And it's like, but there was no answer. And so, not a great couple of days for him again, which only confirms all of the doubts and then creates more doubts. Talking to the players on day 1, I went and asked, there were 21 players. I think I asked 18 of them how they felt about playoff expansion, and they were all for it. They all want it. Only two players were, saying like maybe 15 or 16 games might be too many. One was Mohamed Ibrahim, who averaged 27 carries a game last year. So you can understand him not wanting 16 games. PJ Fleck would have him carry the ball 600 times over the course of a year. Another was Northwestern center Sam Jarek, who's going to be a doctor. So, he's got bigger things on his mind rather than playing 16 games. But even he said, Jarek said that maybe you reduce the number of regular season games, which is never going to happen. Ibrahim said, maybe just pay us a little bit more. Pay us for playing extra games. And maybe that's something that could happen with all of that playoff money. But everybody else, Brandon Joseph at Northwestern, talked about, he's like, I played Texas high school football. My junior year, we played 16 games. My senior year, we played 12. And other players were saying, well, if we all want to go to the NFL where you have to play 17 games, so what's 15 or 16 now?
Did anyone remind those two that they play at Minnesota and Northwestern, so they won't be playing 16 games?
Well, no. Although, that's a pretty good point right there, because that's probably not the situation they're going to be found in.
Kevin, should I drop in our note from many years ago, Bill Livingston and Royce? I can't say it.
Go do the best you can, because
do the best I can.
I'm going to have a hard time following this up.
Patrick Royce from the Star Tribune was a longtime columnist up there. And before the 2005 season, he went down to St. Louis and did a big feature on Lawrence Maroney, who was the star running back, one of the top running backs in the country, coming back to Minnesota. And they're driving around St. Louis. Maroney's driving and Patrick's in the passenger seat. And he asks him, Lawrence, have you given any thought about Minnesota, maybe winning the Big Ten and playing in the Rose Bowl? And here's Patrick Maroney, his response. It was the top running back in the country, the star player at Minnesota. He said, quote, Minnesota ain't playing in no MF Rose Bowl, end quote. So that even the star player at Minnesota had reasonable expectations about what the possibilities were there for the Golden Gophers. But don't tell PJ Fleck that, because he's going to row that boat furiously until he gets Minnesota into the primetime game. I mean, he's already coached in the primetime when he was where was he? Western Michigan. He made a
bowl.
And they gave Wisconsin a better game than his first Minnesota team did when he got to Minnesota the following year. They got blown out His last Western Michigan team actually played Wisconsin pretty close. So.
Yeah, they brought PJ Fleck up first coming out of Kevin Warren. So we went from low to no energy to just I'm high on Pixie Sticks and Mountain Dew and crank. I mean, it was, and I'm not insinuating anything there. I'm just saying things. I was exhausted. I seriously was having heart palpitations after PJ Fleck was done. He sure is exciting, but yeah. Back to Kevin Warren. The biggest thing that kind of sticks out to me is he was asked, and I'm certainly going to paraphrase this greatly, about, do you have any regrets? And he got into about last year, and he went into this philosophical, what is regret? And then was like, no, basically I'd make the same decisions that I made last year, which, kind of takes me back to a Simpsons episode. It's like somebody talking to Mr. Burns about all of his wealth and money and power and everything. He's like, I'd give it all back if I could just have a little bit more, or what. I mean, it was just theater of the absurd with Kevin Warren there. I mean, it just really felt like a somewhere between contrived and tone deaf. It was just not. I mean, really at that point, I kind of just, it took me 3 or 4 speakers to recover, because I just really couldn't believe what I'd heard. And yeah, so. As I'd said in the internal chat, batting third here. Tony, Steve, you're both right. Let's go on to the next topic.
As Frank Sinatra said, regrets, I've had a few, but then again, too few to mention. So that's Kevin Warren right there.
Yeah. Regret is just weakness leaving the body.
Hubris.
I thought that Harbaugh did a pretty fair job at the podium.
He seemed human. He seemed like a normal human being for the first time ever.
And it wasn't just coach speak. It's always going to be coach speak, but it wasn't like to a ridiculous. And there was some authenticity there. There was some meat on the bone.
He talked up his quarterback a lot. Sounds like he's very excited about Cade McNamara. He talked about how in spring practice, after the first practice, he got everybody together and said, did you feel that? And the idea was, we had a very productive work day today. We had energy. We ran around. We got things done. He said, let's channel that and let's do it again. And in his mind, he thought every day they practiced in the spring was at a new level for them where it needs to be. And I think that is the first step back toward respectability, is having standards and living up to them every day. They have not done that for years there. So, I mean, you get to Saturday and it's a total letdown. I mean, we've talked about it early in the season. They've gotten knocked out of the box. And when that happens, it's kind of like, what are you playing for? When you lose to Wisconsin by 3 touchdowns in September every other year, what are you playing for? You lose to Notre Dame by a couple touchdowns in September. What's there left, to do? So I don't know. It to me, he seemed like he had a little bit more oomph, which they need all the oomph they can get.
Yeah, as I wrote on Monday, he wasn't adversarial, which is kind of new because he has been in the past at these things. So that for me showed he's got more passion, more energy, or it's directed in the right way. And I think the coaching changes has helped. So I was impressed as well. Now, it may mean nothing in week 2 against Washington, or week 1, whenever that is, against Washington, and they may start out 3-5 or whatever. But it was a better July than he's had in previous Julys.
Well, I just think with these media days, you have to sort your way through volumes and volumes of just coach speak, typically from almost all of them. So you get very little to go on. And with him, number one, as Steve pointed out, there's usually a cringeworthy moment in there somewhere. He avoided that. It wasn't awkward and clumsy. It was decent. And he also talked about his defensive staff and actually gave you something that they're getting in the room together, and there are arguments and they work things through. He kind of depicted that. He also talked about why Mike McDonald was a good addition to the a defensive coordinator position, that he saw him revamp the entire Baltimore defense on the fly and keep things going. Made a good evaluation about his staff being able to identify player strengths and weaknesses and put them in the right place. And I thought he answered the Ohio State question as well as could be answered. He's in a no-win situation. Somebody asked about, okay, you haven't won a championship, you haven't beaten Ohio State. Okay. And he gave the cute little story about he and his daughter climbing the mountain, and that they have that DNA that they don't quit. And basically, he didn't guarantee a win against Ohio State. He said, we will beat them or we'll die trying, which don't know if that's a great forecast on his future. But regardless, I thought he did about as well as he could. Now we've got Wolf 58 would like to hear everybody's comments on what Gene Smith had to say about Kevin Warren. Steve,
I missed this. I don't know.
I was going to say I don't
Does
recall.
anybody know what report? Wolf, if you've got a specific report, somebody that talked to Gene Smith about Kevin Warren, and it may have happened last week during the media days or since then, I don't know, but I didn't pay any attention to it. Not that I may have seen somebody did interview him, but I didn't read the story, so I don't know.
Well,
go ahead.
I've been scrolling and my internet's really slow right now, but so this is something that Clay Hall, who is Channel 6 here in Columbus, tweeted at the Big Ten Media Days. Said OSU AD Gene Smith was on Big Ten Advisory Committee when the league commissioner was being researched and vetted. Kevin Warren's name was not on the list submitted to Big Ten presidents by the committee.
Wow.
So
where'd they come up with him from? That's weird.
I don't know. The list should have been one person, and that was Jim Phillips of Northwestern, who's now with the ACC. But
yeah, I'm guessing he was vetted very well. I'm Phillips, at least. This the Kevin Warren thing, I don't, and nobody has, I'm surprised it hasn't. We've talked about it on our various podcasts, but that was kind of went under the radar in terms of how is that possible and how did that happen. And maybe more people need to work on getting to the bottom of that to see how exactly did this happen, because you see the results and they're not great.
Not good, Mav. Not good.
I'm going to pin you guys to the wall on this one. We're going to go back quickly to expansion. I'm just curious. We know it's difficult to forecast. We've done, I don't know, 5 or 6 live streams for hours on this platform, and I've churned out, I don't know how many videos because people just keep watching them. So I've tried to attack this thing from every possible angle, but I will lead into it with the same comment I made about NIL when that first rolled out. And of course, we all were given the zillion questions from people thinking that we would know the exact answers to say, I'll give you my opinion. I will speculate and give you all sorts of theories, but I'm going to come right out of the gate to tell you I am not smart enough or wise enough or don't have that Nostradamus gene to tell you how this is going to play out. I can tell you, I can see this pitfall or that pitfall, but we'll be here a year from now, as Nick Saban said this week. And then we'll be able to say, oh yeah, we didn't see that coming, or we didn't ever envision that scenario. So I will say it concerning the expansion situation as well. But that being said, we'll grill you guys a little bit with this. Kevin, if you had a guess, if you had to put $1 on how all this is going to land in the near future when the dust settles, what do you think the landscape of college football is going to look like?
Texas and Oklahoma will be playing in the SEC in 2022. The Big Ten will still be doing research. The remaining teams of the Big 12 will all scatter in the wind, and there will not be a consensus about anything at that point.
Tony?
I think the Big 12 will pick up some AAC teams, maybe a Cincinnati, something like that, if there's a Big 12 to join, and who knows if there will be. I think the Big Ten will still be at 14 teams in a couple of years, but there's going to be some movement with the Pac-12. I do wonder if that makes if they go to say 8 conference games and then 2 games against the Pac-12 or something like that to get even more of a connection there. I think the SEC will be at their 16, and I can see why the playoffs are having an issue right now in terms of like what do they do? Do they stay at 12? And but I don't know that there's going to be an automatic qualifier with the Big 12. Of course, the rules now are for the 12 would be the top 4 conference champs. But good luck convincing the committee that you're one of those top 4 if you're playing in the Big 12.
Yeah, it'd be almost akin to the American Conference, really, without Texas and Oklahoma in a lot of respects. Man, to predict the future is kind of murky. I would hate to see the Big Ten reach on some non-entities just to get the 16 to match the number. To say, okay, we were proactive. We added Kansas and Iowa State. See, look at us. We're 16 as well. We got a great basketball school as well. Basketball. I've covered Ohio State basketball for like 32 years full time. And as much as I love college basketball and enjoy it, it has nothing to do with where the future of college athletics is headed, other than the NCAA holds that $1 billion contract for the tournament with CBS and Turner. And that's what kind of binds them, almost by a thread. That's what kind of keeps the whole thing together. Otherwise, it would be college athletics presented by the Southeastern Conference here in about 2 weeks. So, with no mention of the NCAA ever again. So, are they shooting to become the governing body of college athletics or to lead college athletics into this new frontier? I don't know. There's been some speculation about that 16 is the first stop on their way to 40. The 40 best and biggest and brightest college athletic departments being a part of one umbrella and just telling the other 310 that have glommed onto them for the tournament revenue every year to stick it. So I don't know. It's interesting, but it should be driven by football. It will be driven by football. And again, no non-entities, please. I mean, Maryland and Rutgers we've covered the non-entity factor with this conference ad infinitum, and Nebraska's basically worn itself down to a non-entity at this point. So, to my way of thinking, I mean, you hear about West Virginia, 3 million, maybe 3 million people, TV homes nil. I mean, you just don't gain anything. The Big 12 got into the Eastern time zone. That was kind of what they were looking at with West Virginia and that ability to get to the Eastern seaboard a little bit. But, I don't know that, I think Cincinnati would be a better addition than maybe West Virginia. I don't know. Cincinnati and Houston, would they be perfect for the Big 12? Possibly. So, that'd be the kind of thing I'd be looking at, is just some minor tweaks, because let them have their 16 and see how they like it. As I've said on this show or other shows, we saw this in the 90s. The WAC and the Mountain West came together as one 16-team league, and it lasted for about 4 years. You can't keep 16 schools happy, and when there's only one champion out of 16 schools, that's 15 very unhappy people. And yet, they split up and then they went their separate ways, and it became the 11-team or 10-team Mountain West. And then the rest of them were just kind of shuffled off to, to obscurity. So, Utah actually got bumped up to the Pac-12 eventually. But to me, I think 16 is going to be a hard thing to keep. Either it's going to break up eventually, or they're going to become the true mega conference and pluck off Ohio State and Michigan and Notre Dame and Clemson and Florida State and get the people that they want and create this mega conference to where they can just dictate terms to the rest of the country. Oh, you want to play us? Our team, you can come play a game in our stadium for $800,000. Here you go. That's the going rate now, or whatever. So I don't know, it's going to be tremendous change, probably, again, more upheaval and greed. Greed is kind of ruling the world right now. And Texas, I saw where Texas and Oklahoma turned down more money than what the Big Ten is offering its schools right now to stay in the Big 12. They were going to pay them each a premium to stay, and they turned that down. So that'll tell you where what the thinking is right now with those schools in the SEC.
TriStateWoodsketch.com, TriStateWoodsketch.com. Not to confuse anybody, this is not what you're purchasing, people. So don't be scared off. You send your own photo, your dog, your cat, Kevin, your dog, your cat, whatever you want, a loved one, some type of favorite scene from the beach or the woods or whatever, and then they place it on the surface of your choice. And it's pretty nifty. I've seen about 10 or 12 examples. Once again, TriStateWoodsketch.com. Buy one, get one free. And also, we've got to the voiceofcollegefootball.com, voiceofcollegefootball.com. Go to the top of the screen, hit store. You see all the teams right there, starting with A, going all the way to, if there's a Z out there somewhere, probably Youngstown State would be the last one. I don't know. All right. So some good stuff right there. Again, voiceofcollegefootball.com. Kevin Noon, Buckeye Grove from Rivals, Tony Gerdeman from Buckeye Scoop, Steve Hellwagon, of course, from 247 Sports Bucknuts. These guys are phenomenal. Yakov threw us a couple bucks. Thank you for that. I failed to acknowledge that. Otherwise, we would hope that you guys would contribute going forward. If you want to contribute aside from YouTube, Venmo, PayPal, Cash App to keep us going, please mark Ohio State if you're contributing to this show. Guys, appreciate it. We will be into fall camp when we commence sometime next week.
Looking forward to it.
Sounds good.
We will see you then.